Dito ako lumaki, sa isang maliit na bayan sa Batangas. Napapalibutan ng ilog, sapa at mga hayop. Nariyan ang mga baboy, bibe at manok na parang parte na rin ng aming pamilya. Madalas kong samaan si Lolo sa kanyang maliit na babuyan, tumakbo ng walang tsinelas at maramdaman ang init ng lupa sa aking mga paa. Dito ko natutunan na ang kalikasan ay may sariling galaw, isang tahimik ngunit makapangyarihang ritmo. Sa pinagtong ulan, walang kumukutitap na ilaw ng syudad. Walang maingay na trapiko o mga nagmamadaling tao. Mayroon lang makikitid na kalsada kung saan malayang nakakapaglaro ang mga bata. Matandang puno na saksi sa maraming henerasyon at mga ilog na tahimik na gumuguhit sa lupa. Pero habang lumalaki ako, nagsimula akong bumiyahe. Napadpad ako sa Maynila, sa mas malawak, mas mabilis, mas maingay na mga lugar. Doon ko lang napagtanto kung gaano kaliit ang bayan ko sa malawak na mundo. Para bang isa lang itong tuldok sa mapa. Sa lahat ng ito, bumabalik ako sa isang tanong. Ano ba ang tunay na nagbibigay halaga sa isang lugar? Nasusukat ba ito sa laki ng lupa? Sa dami ng mga gusali? O sa dami ng mga ilaw tuwing gabi?
Hinahanap natin ang pagmamahal sa iba't ibang lugar. We search for love in different places, in traces of home, even in unfamiliar places. Good morning, everyone. I'm AJ from the Philippines, and this is my AYDA entry entitled Love in the Time of Instant Cities. Coming from a small town in my country, I travel for hours passing through the familiar traffic in Makati. And just like every time that I go to Manila, I see the same thing. Progress in the face of tall buildings and infrastructure rising higher and higher. This is the face of urbanization that is happening all across the world. You see, across the world, cities are grappling with the remnants of urbanization. In Detroit, for example, which is once the center of American manufacturing, is an economic disparity and vast abandoned zones. In Lagos, Nigeria, it has led to slums and inadequate infrastructure. In Mumbai, Beijing, and Jakarta, former industrial zones are suffering ecological degradation and displacement of communities. We shift our focus close to my home and we see a familiar story. Metro Manila is heating up and fast. And one big reason is that we almost lost all of our green spaces. From 30% in 1988 to a drastic decline of 0.03% that we have today. Looking at this map of Metro Manila, we can clearly see the areas suffering the most intense heat. The red and pink zones are Manila, Makati, Quezon City, and Pasig. All of these districts near the Pasig River, a 27-kilometer waterway that connects major cities of Metro Manila and Rizal. And along the banks of the river are dozens of underutilized land that we can use as green lungs of the city. One particular example is the Pandacan Oil Depot located along the bank of the river. The Pandacan Oil Depot has long served a critical role in the storage and distribution of petroleum products that supply the metro. But time and time again, incidents have showed us just how dangerous it is to store and transport hazardous materials right in the middle of the city. In fact, in 2005, a health survey proved that the air surrounding the oil depot contains high level of benzene, which is a chemical compound known to increase the risk of cancer. That is to say that the community is not only at risk of explosion, but are breathing in poison every single day. But by 2015, the Pandacan Oil Depot shut down completely, leaving a vast industrial site right in the middle of Manila, surrounded by both homes and businesses, waiting for its next purpose. With the oil depot gone, we're given a moment in the time of history to redefine an industrial landscape, not as another profit-driven development, but something that actually works for both people and nature. This is where we transition from a macro perspective to a micro lens, focusing on how we can transform Pandacan's industrial landscape as a model for urban renewal, ecological restoration, and social inclusivity. pagdidisenyo bilang mahabang proseso ng pag-unawa, pakikiangkop, at pakikibagay. Design as a long process of understanding, adopting, and integrating. You see, our goal for Pandacan was not only to build, but to heal, to reconnect, and to redefine what this place could be. So centered to our approach is to allocate 70% of land for vegetation coverage. And instead of concrete, we're having ecological areas, oxidation lagoons, and surface wetlands that restore biodiversity, improve air and water quality, and help mitigate flooding. We structured our strategies into 3 key dimensions: urban, environment, and social. First, the environment. For such a very long time, the Pasig River has been treated like a boundary or an afterthought in urban planning. But what if instead of seeing it as a divider, we saw it as a spine for both social and ecological network? Because currently, the edges of the Pasig River are covered with concrete infrastructure, which are rigid barriers that does not only disconnect people from the river, but also increases its chances of pollution. My solution is a series of regenerative landscape which are cost-effective, and by doing so, we're already limiting the baseline heat that we're going to respond. The process begins by capturing water from the river, and then it gets filtered in our gabion walls before it gets to our subsurface wetlands, and then stored and recharged in our oxidation ponds. The clean water is then returned back to the river. But how do we make sure that this is not only ecological, but also social and economic? This is where our second and third dimension comes in: urban and social. Retrofitting the old existing tanks open a lot of possibilities in reimagining the Pandacan as a vibrant community hub. The entry will be framed by a retaining wall guiding the user in a deliberate descent. The ventilation will be facilitated by low-level intacts that will support natural airflow. Thermal regulation, we're going to be using dried water hyacinth that are directly harvested from the Pasig River. Those water hyacinth will be used as the paneling for the building and the steel shell, which will act as the buffer of the steel plate. But more than just sustainable, it will also become a form of community co-creation in which we involve the local community themselves in the process. And structurally, we're having a radial beam system that is anchored on a compression ring that stabilizes the entire roof assembly. And by recognizing how Filipinos get excited over pageants, basketball, and boxing, or any events that bring people together, I developed 3 building typologies that respond to the local habits. The first building typology is a fuel for culture, which is an indoor community theater and an indoor library. The second typology is a fuel for heritage, which is an industrial museum that commemorates the historical legacy of the site, lined with the stories of the laborers themselves. All those building typologies will be linked by a network of undulating walkways, which are a layered transition of space that allow the user to experience the tank as both a destination and a journey. A multi-generational zone that fosters interaction, memory, sorry, the clicker's not working.
Do you need to replay?
No.
Okay.
A multi-generational zone that fosters interaction, memory, and connection among different age groups of the community. And as fuel for retail, we have an adaptable flea market, which is flexible. Foldable tables and stalls will give rise to microeconomies that could empower thousands of families without the need for expensive materials, since most of our materials are locally sourced that allows for incremental growth. Our community centers are built with permeability in mind, allowing wind to bypass the structure, thereby reducing pressure and wind load. Our community centers are organized into 3 functional zones. The first zone is a basket weaving in which we transform the dried water hyacinth into handcrafted bags. The same material will be also used for the paneling of the building itself. The second zone houses an eco-charcoal facility that transform the dried water hyacinth into eco-charcoal briquettes, while an inclusive learning center supports skill building and education, in which we also offer labor and employment, even for PWD members of the community. And by restoring the site's natural ecology, we're also bringing back the migratory birds which are once driven away by pollution. And by doing so, we're having birdwatch towers that are carefully integrated with the site's microzones and water systems. A collection of 11 floating pods will be put in front of the site, with each precast pod developed on a tilling pattern and an independent column structure that are prefabricated. Each pod will be planted with native plants and landscapes that will help diversify urban nature. A series of connecting walkways and ramps will be placed in between the pods to enable continuous movement of people along the waterfront. Our pathways and boardwalks are going to be made using FRP grafting, which limits the slippery hazard, and for the project to be functional even in wet seasons. And as consideration for sanitation of the area, we have an eco-toilet design that uses urine diversion techniques and dry composting. All of these interventions with the goal of reclaiming the narrative of the site, restoring what once lost, both in nature and in memory. Going back to my hometown, last year I got to spend time with my inay again. And just like when I was a kid, she would ask if I still had eaten, and she'll try to make sure if I was okay. But this time, it was my turn to take care of her and sit beside her the way that she used to sit beside me. And just like working on this entry beside her was a memory I will forever cherish, but it will also be my last memory of her. She never got to see my entry finish or see how it all came together. But with everything that has happened in these past months, working on this entry has taught me many things. It taught me about memory, it taught me about people, but more than anything, it brought me back to where I began, on trying to understand what it means to keep something alive as a way of remembering and a way of returning. In a world that is constantly rushing to build the next big thing, we begin to lose the things that makes us feel grounded. The love that I've learned back home, in the quiet, in the soil, and in the hands that raised me, is the kind of love that our cities need to remember. That for me is what it means to build with compassion, with purpose, and with love in the time of instant cities.
Thank you.